Story covered by ANN7 some time back. The country's business interests, however, continue to be affected negatively by global trading conditions, with adverse local factors aggravating its performance in recent times. Online via Skype from Cape Town, we have a political and economic analyst, Daniel Silke. We'll just be recapping some of the year's economic highlights, next year's trends, but also employment prospects in the new year. Thank you for joining us, Daniel.
Good to be with you.
Daniel, Manpower SA's research and study that showed that we actually might have positive news for some of the unemployed next year does come as a relief, does it not?
Look, it comes as a relief to get this news. The proof will be in the pudding, of course, by this time next year when we go back and we look to see whether, in fact, we have increased employment opportunities. We come off a rather low base this year. We come off continued disappointing job numbers. And I think that given the very low base that we've got, we can perhaps have some optimism that we're going to come off that low base over the course of the next 12 months or so. But a lot will depend, of course, on global factors, on a broad global recovery. Secondly, of course, a lot will depend upon emerging markets becoming a little bit more in favor. They've been out of favor over the course of the last year or so. And thirdly, of course, we have domestic political considerations in South Africa and an election that's going to sap a lot of our energies over the first 6 months, more or less, of the year. And perhaps only by mid-year will we be able to be a little more bold in addressing some of the key policy shortcomings and deficiencies. So we only might have half a year next year to try and get those job figures looking a little better.
Yeah, let's actually just dissect it all, and let's begin with the global economy and its effect. Of course, our major trading partner is in fact the Eurozone, and what happens there is in fact really impacting us at a local level, particularly in manufacturing and exporting.
Very important. The Eurozone clearly is still under pressure, and this continues to put pressure on our export market and clearly affects our deficits and balance of payments in South Africa. We're not exporting enough, not just because there isn't sufficient demand coming out of the Eurozone, but because of, again, domestic structural issues within South Africa. But I think that if the Eurozone shows some green shoots over the course of the next year, this will have a positive impact on South Africa. Clearly, we know that the US economy, whilst not as important to us as the Eurozone, is showing signs of improvement. And usually, in fact, a recovery is led still by the US. So one can hope that a US-led recovery will impact upon the Eurozone into the next year and possibly will again increase a demand for South African goods and services. But I think it's going to be rather slow and rather patchy, to be perfectly honest.
Daniel, the study that in fact received by Manpower South Africa have very interesting statistics. The idea that the Eastern Cape, for example, will have an employment growth of about 7% and the Western Cape 10%. Fairly high, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal lagging behind.
Yes, I think it is unusual, these anomalies across the country, and I think that we know in the Western Cape the local administration have been quite successful in trying to encourage investors to come into the province in particular. I think we're going to see an increasingly competitive South Africa where province versus province competes for investment and for being more innovative in policy making and creation. And in a sense, this competition that we're seeing across the country is quite good for South Africa. The provinces competing against one another, I think, will perhaps make them a little bit more globally competitive as well, to try and encourage foreign companies to locate call center operations, some degree of manufacturing coming in to the various provinces. Look, the big problem, of course, is provinces where there's a very high rate of urbanization. And Gauteng really must get most of the attention here. One of our core problems in South Africa is this rate of urbanization. People are leaving rural areas, they're coming to the cities, and they're not being absorbed sufficiently into the job market in our urban areas. And I think that this issue of urbanization in South Africa and the effects of urbanization are going to be felt to a degree, of course, in the Eastern Cape, but more dramatically over time in Gauteng. And that's why I think you see that those job creation figures in Gauteng are somewhat lower than the expectations for the Eastern Cape, simply because we've got so many job seekers coming into the greater Gauteng region.
Yes, Daniel, and there's been a lot of talk on the part of government about urbanization and infrastructural plans for a lot of the urban areas, something that will be welcomed, but really, and of course will also add to job creation. But what do you believe the big industries will be that will boom within 2013, 2014?
Well, look, certainly I think there's opportunity in the broad engineering construction industry if government manages to start its implementation of the 4 trillion rand spending that it intends to spend globally on infrastructure. Then clearly I think construction could see an improvement over the course of the next year or so. One of the key impediments to growth in South Africa, no doubt over the last year, has been the supply of electricity, the reliable supply of electricity. And I think it's critical that we need to kickstart that, and that process of upgrading and building Medupi and coming on stream of the other Eskom generators, I think can only assist broad-based industry. But I think going to see some movement, of course, in the service industry. We are global leaders in services. This will continue to be a critical part of our economy. Construction, I think, is going to be relatively good over the next year. I think certainly what's going to be under pressure will continue to be the consumer industry. I think we still have cash-strapped consumers out there, and until we get our job creation numbers going, that particular sector of the economy is going to lag.
Of course, there are, we have issues, political issues. We have the petrol price rising, inflation predicted to be quite hefty on the unemployed, but also those at the lower end of the economy. Not going to bode well for us as ordinary South Africans, I don't think.
I think as consumers, and we all cash strapped, and I think we'll see following the Christmas shopping period very flat figures for consumer growth. And I think this is going to continue into the new year. We've got a high level of private indebtedness. We know that most retailers have had relatively sluggish results, with the exception of a few notable exceptions. And yes, our discretionary spend in South Africa as ordinary consumers has been affected. Poor South Africans in particular are affected much more. Because a much larger proportion of their discretionary spend goes to the essentials of life: the electricity spend, the transportation spend, the basic foodstuff spend. And of course, those inflation rates in those 3 key sectors have often outstripped inflation in other aspects of our economy. So the poor have been under particular pressure in South Africa. Yeah. And I have to say there's not much relief in sight for them in the foreseeable future.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us. Daniel Silke, political and economic analyst via Skype. Now, employees in 8 of the